Hey everyone, happy Monday. Here's a look at the U.S. weekly weather outlook and beyond. Looking at current conditions really tells a lot of what's currently setting up across the West and expanding into portions of the central U.S. And that is a pretty broad trough and series of shortwave troughs within that. And that's bringing heavy rain and snow across much of the West. And that's going to be expanding further east over the coming days. And eventually, what we'll see is this entire trough kind of moving out to the east, and then another series of storms setting up for the West Coast again next week. So a very large change compared to what we've seen really over the last 1 to 2 months, but really much needed rain and snow for the Western U.S. So as we kind of zoom into current conditions right now, I'll talk about fire weather concerns for tomorrow. We have red flag warnings. Pretty high end fire weather concerns for portions of the high plain. But really, right now, the core of the trough is bringing valley rain, mountain snow, extending from the Cascades down into California. The heaviest precipitation really down to the Sierra Nevadas, portions of California, especially the LA area. We do see some flash flood warnings for the Santa Barbara Mountains and areas of LA, both for kind of urban flooding, but also potential debris flows on the Eaton, Franklin, and Palisades burn scars from last winter. And if we look at some of the wind gusts so far, we've seen some pretty strong wind gusts on the order of 60 to 80 miles per hour across some of the Santa Barbara Mountains. You can see some of that showing up here. Several raw stations showing wind gusts into and above 60 miles per hour. In terms of precipitation, too, things still very much happening. And all these observations are coming from synoptic data showing on the National Weather Service Weather and Hazards Viewer. But we can see precipitation totals in certain areas. A lot of this is still kind of actively happening, but areas already approaching quarter plus inch of rainfall. Again, things are just getting started. If we zoom out, just wanted to call out a few things. We see winter storm watches across the northern plains up into the Great Lakes. That's going to be as a result of this first wave leaving and moving into the east tomorrow to Wednesday. And then we see high wind warnings, red flag warnings for tomorrow as well. If we sort of look at the Storm Prediction Center, a few things to call out. One, we have a few wind related storm reports across, again, the Santa Barbara coast, mostly in California, where we have a marginal risk for severe weather. You'll notice severe weather. We see a slight risk Thursday across the southern Ohio River Valley region. Still some uncertainty with that, but the main thing I want to call out is we're seeing some elevated fire weather conditions today, more across some of the eastern foothills and high plains. But really, as that first shortwave trough ejects out, moves out northeast, we'll see extreme, not just critical, but extreme fire weather conditions across portions of the high plains from Colorado into Nebraska and portions of Kansas as well. And those fire weather concerns continue into Wednesday and Thursday as well, further south into the high plains as well. So if we sort of look at big picture, what does this look like? If we look again, we like to look at our 500 millibar vorticity. That gives us a really good sense of where there's rotation, where there's we sometimes call energy, but really where there's rotation in the energy. And these shortwave troughs, as they move through the atmosphere, it causes rising motion ahead of that shortwave trough and descending or falling motion within that. So we tend to see the rising air, precipitation, lower pressure developing out ahead of these troughs, and then the opposite of that behind that. So right now, as of Monday afternoon, we're seeing this pretty broad trough. And as I mentioned, there's individual short waves within this. So these kind of tend to rotate around these broader troughs, sort of like spokes in a wheel. And some of those will actually eject out while the main trough sort of stays in place. So this first trough is pretty broad. It's ranging from the Pacific Northwest down to California. Specifically, this first piece of energy, this main shortwave trough, is coming into California. That's going to lift out into the high plains later tomorrow. This enhanced gradient that is basically lower pressure to higher pressure is going to cause really strong winds at mid levels, but extend down towards the surface. So why we're seeing that high end fire weather concerns for the high plains tomorrow is that first trough lifts to the northeast. We're going to see really strong winds. Some of those are going to mix to the surface, winds in excess of 40 miles per hour with really low relative humidities, with fuels, grasses, and brush that's already really dry across portions of the high plains. As that happens, the second shortwave trough within this broader trough digs into the West Coast in California later Tuesday and into Wednesday. And then we see a third piece, shortwave, come through on Thursday into Friday, and that's going to sort of be the actual full evolution of that trough lifting out to the east. So that's going to do a few things. As this second later tomorrow and a Wednesday. And then that third piece comes through Thursday to Friday. It's going to bring the snow levels down quite a bit. So some valley floors are going to see snow. So it's going to include the Intermountain West, like Salt Lake, Boise. Even some of the coastal locations like Seattle and Portland could see a little bit of snow. I don't think there's going to be much accumulation with it. The accumulations are going to be up in the mountains. It's going to be pretty significant, especially thinking about like Donner Pass and I-80. It's going to be dealing with many feet of snow, especially as these individual shortwave troughs move through. So some pretty high impacts travel-wise for some of the interstates through the mountain passes. And then the other thing I want to touch upon, not only the fire weather for tomorrow, but also that first shortwave trough is going to bring some heavy snow and some icing into the northern plains and Great Lakes. It's going to be a pretty narrow corridor of freezing rain. And one thing I want to call out too, this is typically what we see with these more progressive patterns. When there is freezing rain, eventually there's enough warm air advection or the conditions aren't so cold behind it that ice has some time to basically melt off. What is different from this storm versus Winter Storm Fern about 3 weeks ago was that major ice storm across the southern plains and into the southeast came through, and then we had this Arctic air moving right behind it that really kept that ice in place, prolonging sort of the stress on the power grid, on trees and vegetation, while electricity demand was rising as well with that cold air. So this is a little bit more typical, not super high. Freezing rain amounts, maybe a tenth to a quarter of an inch. Snow is probably going to be the bigger picture. Some blizzard conditions across far northeast Minnesota, and then that snow extending into the northeast and New England, but kind of fizzling out, remaining rather mild out east, and then again cooler out west. And then as we head into later this week, again, I mentioned that third shortwave trough, and the entire trough kind of moves east. As we head into this weekend, we get a little bit of reprieve across the west. This is good. This is heavy precipitation, but not too heavy. And then we get a little bit of a break, which is good to minimize sort of the flooding aspects. But as this moves out east, there's going to be a chance for a few strong storms, mainly Saturday, again, across the southern Ohio River Valley. That storm moves out. There's some uncertainty as to how that trough evolves as it moves into the mid-Atlantic. The GFS, this is just one solution. We always want to look at an ensemble of solution, compare different guidance. GFS deterministic as of this morning, and then about half of the ensemble members are showing this stronger low developing off the coast, so that could be bringing potentially some heavier snow and wind to the mid-Atlantic or northeast into this weekend. Still a lot of uncertainty there. European model, which we also look towards, is showing a pretty similar evolution as well. It's a little bit slower on this and kind of keeps the stronger dynamics and snow and wind out east over open waters. And then, as I mentioned before, kind of reprieve across the west. Next storm system moves in Monday to Tuesday. There is some uncertainty on that. I'll just call out really quick. Why is this pattern different now than what it's been the past couple of months? Well, the Arctic oscillation, one way of how we measure the polar vortex, has gone neutral to positive, and it looks like it's going to become even more positive. That means the polar vortex is more stable. It's strong, but it's remaining in the northern latitude. It's not impinging further south like we've seen a lot of this winter. We've seen a negative AO, which represents a more unstable polar vortex that tends to have more ability to sort of wobble and move into lower latitudes. We're seeing quite the opposite, and it looks like that's going to continue for at least the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned before, we look at integrated vapor transport as one way to look at storm systems, as well as kind of how we classify atmospheric rivers. You can see there's a pretty good plume of moisture with this first shortwave trough moving into California. Here comes that second wave, another area of precipitation, higher amounts of water vapor being advected into California as that goes up the Sierra Nevadas. That all condenses out on rising motion, creating this heavy rain and heavy snow. Things go a little bit quieter. That last part on Friday and into this weekend, we start to watch the next storm system set up off across the northern Pacific. There's some differences between the European and the GFS model. The European's a little bit more progressive. It keeps things a little bit further east. The GFS wants to keep a lot of the advection of moisture and precipitation and area of low pressure further west, versus the European is tending to bring things a little bit more progressive, bringing that actually onshore, albeit a little bit weaker. So we'll kind of wait and see what that actually looks like. But as we head into early to mid next week, it looks likely we'll see another sequence of storms, potential for some stronger actual atmospheric rivers. Some heavier precipitation is possible with this one. A lot to be determined, as this is still pretty far out. Mentioned before too, the winter storm severity index from NOAA shows major to extreme impacts. Again, the main impact is going to be for Donner Pass on I-80 here, and for other passes, we'll see some travel impacts as well. Minor to moderate impacts for the northern plains into the Great Lakes with this system Tuesday night into Wednesday.